Hello everyone, this is Tara at OmniTrax, welcoming you to today's webinar going over operational considerations of the ELD mandate. Before we get started, I want to mention a couple items. You've joined in a muted conference mode. Please use the chat area of WebEx to communicate with us. Following today's presentation, we will conduct a live Q&A, so please start typing your questions for the presenter whenever you have them. Keep in mind the earlier your question is submitted, the higher chance that we'll be able to get to it at the end. I would now like to introduce you to today's presenter. Tom Cuthbertson is VP of Regulatory Compliance at OmniTrax, and he has been in the industry for over 25 years as both a carrier and supplier. Tom works closely with FMCSA and CVSA Traffic Safety Committee. He's chairman of the ATA Technology and Maintenance Council ELD, and connect the vehicle task forces. So with that, Tom, let's begin.
Hi, welcome everybody, and thanks for being on these webinars. I see some names that are quite a few repeats here. What we wanted to cover today, and some of it's repeat, but it's to get us to a different level here, because I thought, in this SNPRM, I wanted to start talking more operational considerations. And they would be in the area of what's the difference between a yard move and beginning of drive, unassigned vehicles, and we're going to hit some of the questions that we seem to get repeat requests for. So, starting this off, we always, give you some glossary here of terms, and it was requested on our first webinar. It seems to go over pretty big. I've added a couple terms here, and two of them are Office of Management and Budget, right here, and the Office of the Secretary of Transportation. And the reason they're important right now is when we get to the calendar, we're going to talk about those a little bit more, because those are key items in this calendar, because they publish every month, probably around the 14th or 15th. It's regulations of significant rulemakings, and they give us an idea where they really stand. So on the 15th of July, the issue date for the regulation still is holding at September 2015. The regulation went to the Office of the Secretary of Transportation on 6/1, and that was an actual date. And the scheduled date to be at the Office of Management and Budget, which is the last stop before it goes back to Federal Motor Carrier Administration for a released final regulation, it's scheduled for 7/21. So it's one of the things I do every morning is look at these calendars, and it's not there quite yet. Typically, a regulation can sit in there for 90 days, but it looks like the way they've adjusted the schedule, that it'll be there for about 60 days. 90 days is the max time it's supposed to be there. But all this above and all this nice, points in the schedule and everything means it looks like it's still scheduled for the end of September, early October, according to the latest published calendar. I want to hit yard moves again because, in between these webinars, I talk to a lot of customers and a lot of people, and there's concerns sometimes about when you're in a yard and concerns about motion and things like that. But what they've done in this SNPRM, right, this is a supplemental notice of proposed rulemaking, not the final regulations, is that they gave an event like a duty status, right, to measure drive time while you're in the yard. Driver can do this manually, put himself in that yard move, and then the yard move would just be recorded as hours of service on duty time. Some things, remember when you're teaching these, make sure the driver doesn't forget to put himself into or out of a yard move at the end of that period of time. The SNPRM, which the supplemental talks about beginning of drive. Now, the beginning of drive is specific, tightened up. Drives only auto duty status, right, that we can do inside this. And the motion will be achieved when you reach a maximum of 5 miles per hour. Now you're in drive. There's no time, nor is any distant consideration according to the new regulation. But remember, there's a yard move that can handle those circumstances where you are moving around a large yard or have prolonged driving time within a yard. So what I wanted to do was really kind of talk about yard move as an event similar to a duty status and compare it to the beginning of drive, right? This is completely a manual entry by a driver, right? So this will be entered on the log, and they talk about maybe what we would do in a log on the grid graph would show a line 5 that would show yard moves in personal conveyance. The current regulation, if you really look at it under AOBRDs, is that, and the definition of driving, is that any time behind the controls of the vehicle you're driving, right? So this current SMPRM takes care of that. Gives you the opportunity to have that yard move, but remember, the beginning of drive would be at 5 miles per hour when you're not in a yard move. So that's a change to what I think we're all used to in the marketplace. Another item that I think notes to some more detailed discussion, and it's one of the items that I think FMCSA addressed for discussion on harassment and being given more control to a driver on how they control their hours of service. What it says in there is that unassigned vehicle moves or unassigned driver moves would be presented to the driver for them to look at it, and that it would let them see what was going to be assigned to them or what they would assign to them. But the driver would have the reconciliation trigger, not someone else. It would be presented to the driver, they would accept them, and take care of them through the edit process. So what really happens here, right? You know, it's worth mentioning, probably most of you on the phone know this, but driver forgets to log in, starts moving the truck down the road, doesn't put they're not in a yard move. You know, you might have a mechanic jumper in a truck that has a CDL, which you're supposed to have to do a road test. Somebody may be just relocating the tractor to another yard, and it's not by the primary driver for various reasons. Moving equipment around between facilities. Other operational questions: if the driver doesn't log out and a mechanic road test, then what do? Well, you're into an edit part. And a mechanic had logged in and doesn't log out, and the driver jumps in the truck. So these are operational things that some of you that have AOBRDs are experiencing now, but I think it's more important to remember about them and look at the operations because of the way the SMPRM is saying that it would require these moves verified by the driver. And in there it said, a driver can do an edit on drive time, but can't shrink it, can only extend it. So you may want to look at operational considerations that if somebody moves a vehicle around and a driver forgets to log off, those kind of things that I think you really want to look at what is happening now in your operation. So some unassigned vehicle move suggestions, and I came out of a carrier. I understand some of the things that go on. Haven't had to live them, for several years, but you might want to think about creating a login for each use of the vehicle, those kind of things. Mechanics at road test have a CDL, have their own login, so it's accounted for, and that driver doesn't have to take care of reconciliation. Relocation of vehicles, create a login for that. You may not. Many people, and again, this is not a one-size-fits-all discussion, but they could create a login for that person when they have to move vehicles around. If you're moving a vehicle from location to another, most likely, in that situation, it's a CDL because you're going to be on a roadbed. And the SNPRM says that each driver needs to be identified by a specific ID. They went through, I don't want to call it exhaustive, but they went through a very notable amount of detail on how you identify drivers and set up user codes and passwords. Okay, so why do we do this, right? Well, it seems like a lot of overkill that I'm talking about. And, even as far back as Outlook in February when we had to talk about this in one of our presentations, some of these things came up. How am I going to do it? What am I going to do with this? So the results of not doing this prevents the driver, in the back office from a reconciliation cycle. Because when it's unassigned and nobody accepts it, you should do a reconciliation for it. because these kind of things would be reviewed in an internal DoD audit, not so much at roadside. Okay, practice it helps. Make sure people are logging off when the function's completed. So if you have a mechanic doing a CDL road test and you sign a user code, an ID to them, process it to log off when you're done. Same thing as somebody's relocating vehicles between facilities, or taking a vehicle from your own shop out to a Freightliner or something like that. It could be an unassigned vehicle move. So those are the kind of things I wanted to hit and talk about that I think are key operational items that people may not take into consideration once the final comes out. So what I wanted to do here is there was a lot of questions and common themes, and a lot of people asked the question about a safe haven. There's references to what people are paraphrasing as a safe haven when you look at adverse conditions and you look at things of that nature, but there's really no pure definition of a safe haven that I've ever found within the regulations. But what it really says is, like in an adverse condition that we covered on the last webinar, if you use that adverse condition, right, what it means is it wants you to get somewhere that you can get off the road within that 2 hours for an adverse condition. Okay. Another question that came up many times was the short haul on the previous 5 days, same location requirement. Right? Really, think about it. If you're a regular route carrier that many truckload carriers are, whether you're flatbed, dry van, tank, whatever, you really don't have the ability to use short haul, even if you're driving less than, or on duty less than 12 hours. Because one of the core requirements for short haul is that you go and come from the same location the day you use it, right? And when you want to use 16-hour big day, that's where that previous 5 days comes in. So there's another segment within the short haul called a 16-hour exemption, and that's a specific requirement for 5 previous days from the same location. So that's where short haul might not, or truckload may not be the right application for this. I've talked to regional carriers at times that they go and come from the same location, and they have that ability to do to a 16-hour exemption. So that works for them. Personal conveyance, not really well defined within the regulation, but people keep asking questions about it. I guess I would say it this way: if you're unladen, right, that's one of the requirements. It's really intended for certain distances, right? I would never say that don't tell a driver can't take the vehicle home. That's common in a lot of places. Some carriers don't allow personal conveyance. Some carriers do. That's not a debate or a discussion. It's just what the facts are. But personal conveyance, if you're driving in the direction of a load and you have a manifest, that's not personal conveyance. If you put yourself on that, that could be subject to a discussion at roadside. So be careful of that. Intended for short haul, short situations. Picking up supplies, getting the vehicle washed, laundry, shower, whatever. That's where personal conveyance comes in, or taking vehicle home because you're not under load, you're not laden. So we had that. Mechanical engines keeps coming up. So within the SMPRM, they do not address an answer for the use of mechanical engines. They put requests in that many of the suppliers gave suggestions to either conduct a meeting or give certain things and allowances for if they want mechanical engines to be able to function with the technical specifications as specified in the SMPRM. That was not defined because they want engine hours, they want odometer readings. You can probably get miles, but you wouldn't be able to get other information on ignition on and ignition off unless there was another box involved. So mechanical engines, to tell you the truth, has not been specifically addressed within the SNPRM. It may come out in the final regulation and have specifications on how to treat that, but at this time, nothing. They talk a little bit about light duty vehicles, not sufficient in there to say things, but I've had customers ask me, well, what do I do when I'm going out and I'm over my 10,000, and when I'm coming back and I'm not over my 10,000? Well, by the rules within the regulation, you're on duty on the way back, but not on duty driving, should you not be at that level. Another question, and I know where this came from, in the preamble, they talk about the use of short haul. And I've seen this question come up at least 5 or 6 times. And the way they worded it, and this was in the preamble of a suggestion or a discussion point, which they negated. And that what they said was that if you were using the short haul exemption and you broke that short haul exemption more than 8 days within a rolling 30 days, that they may consider enforcing an ELD for those types of carriers. That's not what happened. They did not make it part of the final rule or regulation for short haul exemptions to put some limits on it in this fashion. They just made that as a comment within there, and there was discussions on this, that where would it go from there. But I did not see it anywhere in the final part of the regulation in the SNPRM that said short haul would have to do an ELD at all, other than the days that they may break the criteria to be able to use a short haul exemption. So with that, I want to remind everybody that we do have and continue to post information on the ELD mandate. We've put some kind of white paper videos out, little that are animated to talk about things that are within the mandate at a very top level. But we'll continue to post this information and probably run another webinar in August and talk about some more information on this. Appreciate the patience and attendance here. These webinars have been very well attended. And with that, I'd like to go to questions.
Great. Thank you, Tom. So we will jump in and get to as many questions as we can. So this one is asking to please discuss the safe haven again.
Okay.
Driver at customer just loading and is at 14th hour and cannot stay. Will
Right.
violate HOS if moves. What do you recommend?
Yeah.
Off-duty seeking safe haven or violate HOS and drive to safe haven and show narrative?
Well, it's tough for me to say, and enforcement's not always going to try, and look for every little thing all the time. I guess and this is a guidance, and I'm not trying to tell everybody on the phone this is what you should do, because each situation is going to be a little different on what distance you're traveling, right? But if you hit your 14th hour, the day has been the 14th hour, for a long time, right? I would suggest that if you were forced to move your vehicle, I would put a remark within your log at that duty status and specify what happened, that you were required to move off property, right? And you're going to pick up a violation. I don't know how else to handle it, but I think enforcement's well aware that these circumstances happened, and as long as somebody doesn't, end up driving an hour and a half or 2 hours away, right, and break the rule in I don't want to call egregious, but break the rule in a fashion that is extensive, that's a different set of rules or requirements that are going to happen, right? So the suggestion is, when you get this yard moving, I've seen this, I've heard this from, customers many, many times. What do I do? The same thing as on a sleeper berth. What happens if somebody pulls up on an exit ramp, right, and in the middle of sleeper berth, and enforcement comes along and says, move it off the ramp, it's not safe? Same situation. Usually when they tell you to do that, they don't do anything inappropriate. But the AOBRD doesn't know that, so you need a comment for these things. But for safe haven, there's really not a pure definition of safe haven and within the regulation language. Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, Tom. This question is, so the mechanics that even do a 1 mile or less road test has to have an E-log sign on?
Well, here's I'm giving you suggestions and guidance here. I don't think there's anything cast in concrete, but here, what we'll have to do in these things is, if it's not a yard move, right, we're going to have to count drive time based on up to 5 miles per hour. And 1 or 2 miles doesn't take long to get to 5 miles per hour. If somebody's not logged in, it's going to create an unassigned driver leg. So does this sound arduous? I don't have any better suggestions other than create these logins to do this. It may work fine that you make a comment in the log, or the driver makes a comment in the log, that when the unassigned vehicle moves presented to them, that they make a comment that this was a road test and it's not the driver's situation. That's another way to look at it. Okay, so if that suggestion helps you, which I hope it does, that's another way to do it. But you need some documentation as to why was this vehicle moved 2 miles to 5 miles to 3 miles to 20 miles. Okay.
Thank you. This question is, do non-CDL drivers and trucks need to use electronic logs?
Well, if you're driving a vehicle that's a Class 6 to 8 vehicle, right, and it's got a DOT number on it, I think we're splitting hairs about whether you need a CDL or not. I think that, when you're running that vehicle at that level, that to my knowledge still requires a CDL. If you're in a light duty truck, that doesn't require a CDL. I mean, even the mechanics that road test, unless I don't understand, mechanics that road test, from my education and understanding, is they require a CDL to do a road test. It doesn't have to be a full, CDL. It just has to be, I guess, what you'd call Class A, Class B. But so I guess that's the best way I could answer that.
Thank you. Now, a driver delivers his load and has to leave the property. He is not under a load. Can he use personal conveyance to go to the nearest truck stop?
Well, yeah. I mean, I would say that if the driver is completely unladen, the manifest is satisfied, there's no other load assigned, they're not going in the direction of another load, right? That potentially could be used as personal conveyance if you're just trying to go to a truck stop, right? Because you have to be off duty to do that, and you have to be unladen with no other requirement, of a load or a secondary manifest.
Okay, thank you. This person's also looking for clarity on the 100-150 air miles. Does it mean that if I'm traveling within 100-150 mile air radius and on duty for less than 12 hours, that I'm on duty but not driving regardless of truck, trailer, and load size, weight? If that makes sense?
No. Just try that one more time. Let me take this part a little bit, right? The 100-mile air rule is for a CDL driver. Okay? So the 100-mile air rule radius from where you started that load. The 150-mile radius is for non-CDL. Okay? Depending on the type of vehicle. Okay?
Okay.
Now, hit me with the rest of it. Let's see if I can.
Okay. Does it mean that if I'm traveling within 100 to 150 mile air radius and on duty for under 12 hours, that I'm on duty but not driving regardless of truck and load weight or size?
All right, I'm having trouble piecing that one together.
We can follow up with this person offline.
Yeah,
I'm just
please
gonna
do
move
that. I
on
mean,
to the next.
it's a good question. It's a little bit layered for me to try to do this over the air. I'm sorry.
Okay. We'll get you offline. If this question is, if my driver has an empty trailer connected, can he use off driving?
I mean, I'm assuming you're asking about personal conveyance, right? If it's an empty trailer, again, this is where the discussion on personal conveyance says that you're unladen. I know that I've had circumstances where people said you have to bobtail to be able to take personal conveyance. I've never seen that in any regulation language. There is nothing that says that a trailer has to be detached to be on personal conveyance. Some people will detach their trailer into a trailer yard that are loaded and bobtail on personal conveyance just so they can take personal conveyance and go to, shower, laundry, have a meal, and they don't want the load with them and they want to be on personal conveyance for that. That's acceptable. But there's nothing that I've seen that said in the regulation language that you must detach the trailer to be on personal conveyance. The wording is you're unladen, you're not carrying product, you're not under a manifest. That's what unladen means.
Okay. Now, you talked about mileage on personal conveyance. Is there any written amount of miles?
Only if you're in Canada. If you are a carrier or a driver that goes in and out of Canada, Canada's personal conveyance is 75 kilometers, which I think is about 48.5 miles per 24-hour period, meaning your day. But there is no discussion on mileage and time necessarily on personal conveyance that's there at this time. When we were on the MICSAC committee, we had, in one of the sessions, we probably talked about this for 45 minutes on whether a limit should be put in or not put in, and that's a very difficult discussion, let me tell you.
Okay. Now, this question should be simple. Please define laden. Is an empty trailer laden?
Well, it's the empty trailer is unladen, and I think the second part of that is that you're not on a manifest. If there's a manifest assigned to the vehicle and you are driving in the direction of that manifest for pickup, that may not be considered as personal conveyance.
Okay, thank you. Now, what is the smallest class vehicle that will require ELDs?
As far as I know, they didn't change the rules on that to keep record of duty status, you're at that 10,000 pound level.
Okay. My company's ELDs are currently set to go on the drive line at 25 miles per hour. Did I understand correctly that the new DOT mandate will be drive line activation at 5 miles per hour?
Yes. The way it's worded, now it's an SMPRM. The final could come out somewhat differently, right? But I think if you're set at 25 mile per hour threshold, that will be back to about 5 miles per hour the way it's worded right now to start of drive.
Okay, thank you. If we do a shift change and have multiple drivers logging off duty as they get into the van for shift change, is the driver of the van the only one considered on duty for the trip back to the yard?
Okay, I'm trying to make sure I grab the discussion here. So I'm going to try to reconfirm this question, is that you might have 2 or 3 drivers in the vehicle at one time. Not sure if that's what we're saying here. But if those other drivers are in there and they would still be considered on duty, the only one that would be in a drive status is the person taking the van back to the yard. but the other ones would be considered still on duty. As long as they weren't released from work, that's an on-duty time. You can find that in the actual definitions and the regulations.
Okay, hopefully that answered it. This question is, in personal conveyance, can a driver be pulling an empty trailer, or does he have to be bobtailing?
Well, I think we hit that before, but it's worth repeating because a lot of people still have the same discussion, the same concerns. Like I said, I don't see anything in the regulation that says you have to be bobtailing. If you're unladen, meaning you're empty and there's not a manifest that you're running under, then you're unladen. And and this is like I've heard this from carriers. It may be a personal opinion of mine, not necessarily OmniTrax, but I've driven a bobtail. It's not always a lot of fun, and if you have a trailer on the tongue, it's a lot safer, a lot more control of the vehicle, empty or not. But there's nothing in there that I've seen that said you have to be bobtailed. People do that, like I said, operationally. A driver may be on a length of haul of 800 miles and they need to do personal conveyance, and they'll have a secure drop yard, and they'll drop the trailer and run bobtail to the truck stop and do their personal stuff for an hour or so. May only drive 25 miles, but they'll do it. But there's not a requirement to be bobtailed if you're unladen. But if you're laden, then you can't have that trailer there full of product under a manifest.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Now, Tom, do you have any information you can share on charter buses and how they might be affected in all of this?
Well, the way, passenger carrying vehicles, all right, are under FMCSA regulations for hours of service. From what I've seen within the SMPRM, that discussion is still there because they're still required to keep records of duty status. Their rule sets are different than our typical the way we calculate daily hours and off duty included into the duty day. That's different for passenger vehicles, but it appears from what I've seen that they would be under this ELD discussion.
Thank you. Do the regulations allow you to train ELD and issue paper logs while in training?
Well, there's nothing in the regulations that address that. What we've recommended, and it's been received, and again, I'm not going to give you that enforcement receives this 100%, is that we suggest that if you're in training, right, that you put a letter together for the drivers on the company letterhead that says that you are in the process of training on an ELD to be comfortable with it, and that your primary record of duty status is still on paper. But make sure that you're very specific, and you got to be careful of time frame, because this can't be something that you're. I would suggest that they will tighten it up if somebody says they want to do it for 6 months. I think it has to be much shorter than that. But date the letter, company letterhead, and spell out that you're in a training mode and that you're still requiring the driver to keep paper logs and not use the electronic as the primary record of duty status.
Thank you. Now, if a company has a malfunctioning e-log device, how should one handle legally to cover the company and driver's best interest?
Within the ELD SMPRM, they talk about the windows. I don't know if they're going to change these or not because people put some comments in on this, more than one, is that they want you to immediately go to paper logs. Even the mandate doesn't say that you're not supposed to be required to keep a blank logbook in the vehicle should the device fail. That's still a requirement. That hasn't changed since the AOBRD came out in 1988-89. So you're legally okay to keep paper if the device is not functioning for a short period of time, and what they're talking about 24 hours and 8 hours of notification, things of that nature to get the device remedied. So there is things addressed in the SNPRM on putting a shorter duration on the amount of time that you have to repair and get the device functioning again. But you're not illegal under those circumstances to have paper logs, and you, like I said, still remember you're required to keep a blank logbook in the vehicle. I don't see any changes to that.
Thank you. Now, what about LTL carriers and personal conveyance? There is always a secondary BOL. Do you have anything to talk about with LTL carriers and personal conveyance?
I've seen LTL carriers use personal conveyance when they're going between line haul distribution, between distribution centers and line haul tractor. I've seen personal conveyance used by LTLs because of the driver needed to take the vehicle home that evening. I hope this is answering your question. But in those circumstances, I don't know that it's, as long as you're not latent, of course. I've not seen other restrictions on that. I'm not sure what the reference is to BOL. Could you repeat that part?
It wasn't very descriptive. It just wanted to know about LTL and personal conveyance and something about separate BOLs. We can go back to this one.
But I don't. That's the best I've seen. You know, I've seen line haul tractors between distributor centers potentially use personal conveyance. I've seen it where end of day the driver goes and comes from the same location and then takes the vehicle home. And you know, we have definitions of hybrid LTLs that, you know, go longer distances, that they have the ability to use it. But they have to be unladen, right? That's the other situation.
Okay.
Sound like a broken record, but that's the key phrase, right?
Okay. Now, what is the distance you can travel and not go on the drive line?
There's no distance under the SNPRM mandate that they talk about. Let's go back to. I'm going to jump back a few slides, okay? Don't know if this will help, but if we look at this, okay, there's the yard move. So many people have you know, operational issues or concerns about when you're in drive, when you're in a yard, all this stuff, okay? FMCSA heard all this, and they put a yard move as an event. So if you're in a yard move and you're only measured on duty, there's no drive time. But when you're out of a yard, okay, and you're on a roadbed, right, or you know, you're out away from a shipper or a consignee location, and again, you know, people can second guess what I'm saying here, right? You're in a situation where you're not in that yard, so you're in a situation when wheels start moving, you know, you're in drive. And what they want is a trigger right now on a motion detection, and there's no distance or time involved right now. It says that motion will be detected at up to a maximum of 5 miles per hour.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. Well, we are running out of time now. Thank you for going back and clarifying that. So we're going to go through the questions and either get back to the people who, you know, whose questions we couldn't answer, or we'll incorporate them into the next webinar, which, stay tuned, that will be in August. So thank you, Tom, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Be sure to check out eldfacts.com for the most updated information.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Sorry, some of the questions were pretty comprehensive, and I hope my answers were a lot clearer than mud, but some of them there's not this hard and fast answer for. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
This concludes today's conference call. You may now disconnect.